Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I love introducing you to people who are committed to their own development and also committed to the growth and development of the people around them so they can become the best version of themselves. And that's also the key focus of my company, Grow Strong Leaders. We publish software tools and books for improving the way people interact with each other at work. And you can find us at growstrongleaders.com. Today, I am, Ruth, beyond excited to have you here. My guest today is Dr. Ruth Gotian, and she is a brilliant person who has published a book recently. You see it behind her if you're watching the video, called The Success Factor. And she has amazing credentials, which I want to share with you before we go into all the questions I have for her around her book. Ruth is the Chief Learning Officer and Assistant Professor of Education in Anesthesiology at Weill Cornell Medicine. She's the former Assistant Dean of Mentoring and Executive Director of the Mentoring Academy at that center. In 2021, she was selected as one of 30 people worldwide to be named to the Thinkers50 radar list, which is dubbed the Oscars of management thinking. And recently, she won the Thinkers50 Distinguished Achievement Radar Award, ranking her the #1 emerging management thinker in the world to bridge theory and practice. Ruth is also a semi-finalist for the Forbes 50 over 50 list. In addition to publishing in academic journals, she is a contributor to Forbes and Psychology Today, where she writes about optimizing success. Her research is about the mindset and skill set of peak performers, including Nobel laureates, astronauts, and Olympic champions. And she writes about all of these folks and so many more in her excellent new book, The Success Factor. And the subtitle is Developing the Mindset and Skillset for Peak Performance. Ruth is one of these folks that you are just going to want to take notes. So just get your pencil and paper out right from the get-go. She says so many brilliant things, and I'm just delighted to have her with me. Ruth, so glad you're here.
Oh my God, the pressure is on. I feel like I need to drop some tweetable phrases out.
Well, you're so articulate. You are just, everything, because I've heard other interviews you've done and you have so much knowledge. It's just going to flow out effortlessly for you. It's just a part of who you are. So I know more about your background from having read your book now, and I would love for you to just share with my audience a little bit about your journey in studying success. What was it that triggered your interest in this topic?
I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with my parents and my 2 siblings. And part of the living room was cornered off with a bookshelf and a piano, so I could have my own corner, right, as the only girl. And I always looked at what other people had, and I thought, oh, that's success. And I thought, to get to that success, you have to go to the right schools, be born into the right family, have a certain pedigree. And I wasn't quite sure how you get that. And as I grew older, and I started working with what's called an MD PhD program. So I ran a program where my students got the dual degrees, an MD and PhD degree. And this program has a 3.5% acceptance rate. So you have a better chance of getting into Stanford than you do this program. So these are the best of the best. And I realized that my preconceived notions of how you become successful were not accurate. And as I was working there, some of the faculty have won the Nobel Prize. And that really confirmed that my earlier assumptions were incorrect. And we were having a problem nationally that in this very competitive program, people have worked and sacrificed their entire lives to get to this point. These are who we call physician scientists. These are the people who see a problem in patients and look for a solution in the lab. And people were leaving this profession, very similar to what we're facing now, the Great Resignation. And everyone was talking about it. Books were written about it. Articles were written about it. Every conference for over a decade, we were talking about this. The National Institutes of Health created a task force to look into this problem. And yet the needle hadn't moved. We still had a dearth of physician scientists. And I really was convinced that we were looking at the wrong end of the problem. I didn't think the problem was those who were leaving. I really thought the solution was, how do we get those who are staying to be so exceptional that their work will more than make up for those who are leaving? Because we had a lot of those people. We needed more of those. So at the age of 43, while working full time and raising my family, I decided to go back to school. And I got my doctorate. I studied adult learning and leadership, and I have been studying success ever since. It started with physician scientists, and then it snowballed into astronauts and Olympic champions and NBA champions and senior political figures and all kinds of super interesting people. And now I'm a little bit obsessed.
Well, your book, I just really want all of my listeners to get a copy of that, because you write, even though you have this, scientific background and in the medical field, who you've surrounded yourself with all these years, and you've written so many academic papers, your book is really in plain English for everyone and lays out very specific things that people can do. And it's just filled with really interesting stories of these super achievers. Before we get into the 4 elements that you talk about in your book, I would love to know if you have settled on any kind of definition of success. I know you've referred to it as a moving target, but
Yes.
Now that you've done all this work over the years, does it consist of these 4 elements that you write about, or do you have a more global definition for it?
Well, the 4 elements is how you achieve it. But the definition of success, Meredith, you're right. First of all, it changes based on who you ask. And second of all, we never quite get there, right? And we don't always recognize it when we achieve it. And sometimes the goalposts move because it is always such a moving target. But the definition I used, which was really the first 2 phases of my research, back when I was doing my dissertation, it consisted of 3 things. 1, high achievers are noted in their field. They have a reputation for moving the needle forward, creating a paradigm shift in the way we think about things, do things, process things, go after things, achieve things. We are changing the way we do things because of them. And people recognize them for that in some way. It could be the Nobel Prize, but it doesn't have to be. So that's the first one, right? And I say that because there's a lot of Nobel Prize winners, but Dr. Tony Fauci, who's leading our infectious disease, our COVID response here in the United States, he's very well known in his field, and he's been doing this long before COVID happened, but yet he has not received the Nobel Prize, right? So it doesn't have to be about an award. It's that you have done things to create that paradigm shift. That's number 1. Number 2, as you succeed, as you move up, you are pulling other people up with you. So you understand that there is enough light to be shed on everyone. Everyone can have the spotlight if they are doing the good work, if they are leading the project. Mm-hmm. And you are about lifting as you climb. And third, when you've reached this peak level, you are all about the legacy, all about mentoring the next generation. You are paying it forward. And you might do that one-on-one, mentoring people, Or you might run big groups in order to do large groups and really help develop that next generation. So you'll notice that it's not the reality stars that are on television who are in the book, right? I don't have the Kardashians in there, but I'll have some very famous people in there. So Steve Kerr, right, the coach of the Golden State Warriors. And we have the former NASA chief astronaut, Peggy Whitson. But then there'll also be people that you have never heard of, but have done such incredible things, such as Dr. Debbie Heiser, who took on the US government and got the way that we diagnose depression in nursing homes to change. And she did that as a grad student. So there are things that will, I think there's so many stories. There's over 60 people whose stories are in the book. There's going to be something for everyone because there's something from almost every industry.
Yes. And, I love the fact that you didn't emphasize financial in your description there, because, and also what's to me an underlying theme of what you're saying is service to others. So success can be measured not just in what you've done for yourself, but what you're doing for, the greater good. And I think that really, it just resonates with me. I think it's absolutely true.
It's so true because astronauts until recently were government employees. They didn't get paid all that much. Maybe they got hazard pay, right, for going to space, but they didn't really get paid all that much. So it was never about the money, just like it's never about the medals that they get. There's always a bigger vision.
Mm-hmm. One of the favorite quotes from the book, and I think you put it in there multiple times, was from one of your own mentors, Dr. Ben Shapiro. And the advice that he gave you, and I would love for you to share that, because that one statement can apply to every one of my listeners, no matter what they're involved in doing.
Here's that tweetable quote. So my mentor, Dr. Bert Shapiro, was in charge of all MD PhD programs at the National Institutes of Health. And when I told him that I was applying to grad school, I told you I was in my 40s. This is kind of crazy, right? I was working full time, had a family. And I thought that what I wanted to do was do a predictive model so I can predict who would be successful in these programs. And like a good mentor, he didn't say, no, he didn't say, yes, that's a great idea. Or he didn't say, no, don't do that. He said, do something important, not just interesting. And that one sentence, those 6 words, changed everything. Because instead of it being an institutional study, it became a national study. And because it became a national study, it got the attention of a lot of people. And it was so fascinating because it had a ripple effect. It had an impact. And when I interviewed Dr. Tony Fauci, and I asked him, how do you pick which projects to work on? Because there's so many infectious diseases he could have picked. And he has worked on every major pandemic. He has worked on HIV and AIDS, Ebola, SARS, now COVID. And he said to me, I pick something important, not just interesting, because if it's interesting to me, that's a nice hobby. If it's important, it'll have a ripple effect and it'll impact people I won't ever meet. Now, 2 people have basically said the same exact thing to me. And that's when I knew that it can't be about what's interesting to me. It has to be on what's important, because that's how you create that paradigm shift. Everything else follows. But if you really want to change the way people see things, do things, process things, you have to do things that are important.
And I feel that you have done that with this book. I feel like it really is important what you have shared, because what you're doing is saying, the skill set and the mindset of the really elite performers of the world, no matter what field they're in, that's accessible to everyone because you took the time to really study what were those elements that make the difference? And so I would like first for you to talk about the mindset of those elite performers. What is it that they bring to their approach to anything they do that helps them be successful, whereas the average, and I use that in quotes, average person might not bring?
Well, there's actually four things that they do. And the first one, it starts with really their intrinsic motivation. And what is intrinsic motivation? Intrinsic motivation is that fire in your belly. The reason you wake up in the morning, the reason you can't quiet your mind at night. It's what you're always thinking about. It's what you always want to do, what you love doing, what you would do for free if you could. Now, this is different from extrinsic motivation, which is when you do things for the awards, diplomas, rewards, promotions, bonus. That's when other people are judging you. And when other people are judging you, that is really hard to maintain long term. But if it comes from within, even if you get a rejection, you're still going to plow through it. You're going to, because you love it so much. So the first thing is you really want to tap into your intrinsic motivation. Now, the last third of the book really is all action steps where I teach people how to actually implement all of these things in their lives. So the first one is intrinsic motivation. The second one is your work ethic, perseverance, grit, resilience, whatever word you want to use. These are the people who don't quit when times get tough, because high achievers don't question, here's another tweetable one, they don't question if they will overcome the challenge. They focus on how to overcome the challenge. And they ask themselves, what is that strategy I haven't thought of yet?
So let me stop you there a minute, because I wrote down something. You mentioned Dr. Deborah Heiser earlier and her work there in nursing homes in getting a new type of diagnostic to identify depression. What she was saying is similar to what you just said. What is the strategy to make this happen? I loved that quote, because that applies to any challenge that we might encounter in our lives. And it gets us outside of the narrow window we might be looking through in trying to identify solutions.
So true. So it puts you in the driver's seat, because now you're in control. Now you're in control. I think that's also how all the Olympians who competed in the Olympics got through the challenging year of having their Olympics postponed, right? What could they control? Because high achievers control what they can control. They can't control the pandemic, but they can control what they do during the pandemic. Can't go to the gym, but I can go outside. I can Zoom with my trainer. I can eat right, sleep right, drink the right things. So it's about putting yourself in that driver's seat. And I think one of the things that's so important to high achievers is that they're okay with failing, actually. As long as nobody dies, what's the worst that'll happen? For them, they fear not trying more than they fear failing. And that's actually, I think, what differentiates them from so many other people. Some people, they're so afraid of failing, or they're so afraid of succeeding that they can't get out of the starting blocks, or they can't actually finish anything. But when you fear not trying more than you fear failing, your failures are data points. You learn from them. Very different approach. You ready for the third one?
Yes.
So the third one is a strong foundation, which is constantly being reinforced. What you did early in your career, you will do later in your career as well. So, for example, Neil Katyal argued, you were waiting for him.
I loved that story.
He argued 45 cases before the Supreme Court of the United States, more than any other minority lawyer. Now, most attorneys don't argue one. He's argued 45. Now, what's interesting, I asked him what he does to prepare before these cases. And he said he's done the same three things for all 45 cases. Strong foundation, constantly being reinforced. I said, Neil, what are those three things? Well, first he prepares a binder that has the answers to every possible question he might get asked. And he walks in with this binder into the Supreme Court and puts it on the table in front of him. And he said he's never once opened that binder in 45 cases, but he said the process of preparing it is what prepared him for the case. And then the next thing he did was he has what's called Moot Courts. These are simulated sessions, simulated courtroom sessions, mock trial, if you will. He said early on in his career, he would do 15. And he said now he does about 5. The point is he's still doing them. He doesn't say, oh, I've done 45 cases. I don't need to do this anymore. And then last but not least, his children, the night before opening arguments, they get to hear the opening arguments of the case. Because Neil Katyal said, if I can make it so that a child can understand, then the court will understand. And those are the same 3 things. He has that strong foundation, which he's constantly reinforcing. Mm-hmm. And now that last one,
yes,
which is the informal learning, right? So all the billionaires, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Mark Cuban, they're known for reading hours and hours every day. But it's not reading that made them billionaires. It's actually being open to new knowledge and making these connections that other people don't yet see. But they're able to because their mind is open to new knowledge. So you can certainly read books and articles and blogs and watch videos on YouTube and listen to podcasts and take LinkedIn learning courses. So many ways for you to learn new things. But one of the pivotal ways that you can also learn is by talking to other people. And all the high achievers surrounded themselves with a team of mentors, people who believed in them more than they believed in themselves. And you can set up a team of mentors for yourself as well. So those are the 4 things: the intrinsic motivation, the work ethic, the strong foundation, and the continuous informal learning.
There's so many different ways we could go with each of those. I want to pursue, though, the last one you just mentioned, and mentors, because one of the things that you said that was a little bit surprising, and it kind of goes against what you might think of as standard advice, is to not ask someone to be your mentor. That's right. So that was a momentary head scratcher, but then when I heard you explain it, it made sense. I would love for you to share what is the best way to find someone to be a mentor, and what is the purpose of having a mentor?
Well, I'll start with the second one first. So the second question first, which is why have one? The research is crystal clear. Those who have mentors out-earn and outperform those who don't. They also have lower burnout, show greater loyalty to the organization, make more money, get promoted more often, make more money over their careers. They have greater self-efficacy. I mean, the research just goes on and on and on. The problem is most people don't know how to find a mentor. One, they're looking for one person who's perfect, and no one person is perfect. So you create your own version of perfect by having a team. But the other issue is that people don't always know how to approach these people. And I tell people, don't actually ask anyone to be your mentor. Because when you're asking someone to be your mentor, you're asking to take on another job, another obligation. And I know when people ask me this all the time, I'm thinking, I do not have time for this. But what if instead I would say, Meredith, I'm working on a project on team communication. I know you have expertise in this. Could I talk to you for 15, 20 minutes? I'm stuck on something and really wanted to get your thoughts. Now that's very different because it's specific and it's time-bound, and you know that I want to talk about an area of your expertise. I don't just want to talk about life and the weather, right? Mm-hmm. That's very different. People are always happy to share their expertise, share their opinion, but they want to know that it's leading towards something. Now, if you have enough of these conversations, you are actually building a relationship where the other person knows, likes, and trusts you. And once you have that relationship, these conversations are going to happen organically. And who cares if they have the title mentor or not? That's a title that the mentee offers, right? You don't call yourself a mentor. Your mentee has to call you one. So that will come when the relationship is formed. And that's why you don't ever ask anyone to be your mentor. You let it actually develop organically. Best way to do it.
And if I'm not mistaken, you developed that with Dr. Shapiro, right? He ended up being one of your mentors. Talk a little bit about how that one grew organically to make it more, clear and concrete for people listening and wondering, how do I do that?
It's fascinating because he was basically in charge of our budgets at the National Institutes of Health. And how did this person become my mentor? Well, it happened long before there was Zoom. We would see each other at the national conferences every single year. And these conferences were multi-day conferences, and we got to know each other there. And we got to have meals together. And he got to hear about my family, and I got to hear about his family. And that developed for a very long time, for years. And when I was stuck on something, I would pick up the phone and call him and say, how do you suggest I approach this? Or do you know anyone who's ever dealt with this before? Or I have this opportunity. What do you think? And I think he was keeping his eye on me. And I was he is a walking encyclopedia. So any nuggets that he drops, I was collecting. And over the years, he really became that person who I would always ask for guidance, because he had, not only does he know everything about everything, he knew the field I was working in inside and out from a very strategic level. So he would say to me, this is worth it. No one else is doing it. Or talk to these people. They tried it. You might hit some brick walls. Why don't you ask them how they overcame that? He never told me to go after or not go after something. He didn't move those barriers for me, but he taught me how to overcome them. And that was, I think, the best advice. And when I told him that I wanted to go back to school, he actually wrote one of my letters of recommendation. And he never said, this is crazy. It was crazy, but he never said, this is crazy. He was incredibly supportive. And when I finished the degree, he actually flew in for my graduation party. So, and he was at the book launch party. I mean, this has been going on for decades, our relationship. So,
it's such a powerful story because it shows really there's commitment to each other.
Yeah.
In that relationship. The other thing that there were a couple of things that I was thinking of as you were describing this. One is a good coach or mentor really is helping the other person think for themselves.
That's right.
Not trying to provide answers. So I think sometimes the traditional way of looking at a mentor is they save you time. They teach you things that you don't have to struggle, but your definition is somewhat different from that. They're not necessarily revealing all, but they might give you some hints or directions of where to look as opposed to telling you a lot.
Absolutely, because you don't know what you don't know. Sometimes I don't know what questions to ask. And I think the really good mentors just open up your eyes to what is possible. And they introduce you to people and they introduce you to ideas, but it's up to you to make it happen. You have your goals. They help you find ways to achieve them, but the mentee has to come ready with their goals and with their plan. And they help refine the plan.
Well, let's flip this around a little bit and think about, are there any downsides to being a super high achiever?
Yes. There are. On the one hand, I could say, you're the high achiever, you get to decide, right? But on the other hand, sometimes you can't decide and your calendar starts to control you. So being spontaneous becomes a little bit more challenging. The other part is that it can also be isolating, because most of the people in the organization are not like you. And group work becomes incredibly frustrating because you have a bar of excellence that other people can't meet, won't meet, don't try to meet, which means that you wind up doing more than your fair share of the load. And we all know this because we've all worked in group projects and we all know who those people are.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, it's very, very challenging. And one of the things I talk about in chapter 3 of the book is actually what you can do to help these high achievers and retain them so that they don't feel as isolated and they feel that they can constantly grow, because they're looking at who's getting the resources. Well, the resources are not going to the high achievers. They're going to the ones who are not meeting the metrics to help them get to baseline. Nobody's paying attention to the people at the other end of the spectrum, which is unfortunate because they're the ones moving the company forward.
Mm-hmm. There have to be some companies that you have encountered along the way who are getting it right, who are paying attention to these high achievers. What are some of the things they do to keep those folks not just fully engaged, but, ramped up to want to keep giving their very best because they feel valued and appreciated for who they are and what they do?
It's about feeling valued, which means if you're going to have a bonus system, you need to have some sort of way to differentiate between those who are really moving things forward versus those who are doing the bare minimum. That's number one. Number two, the high achievers really want to learn more. They're constantly looking for ways to learn and grow, and offering them the opportunities, the time, perhaps some money to go to conferences or courses would be great ways to help them do that. Now, remember, this is actually great for not just retention, it's also great for recruitment. Because if you start giving them all these opportunities and resources, and when you need to start developing your bench, you need to start hiring more people, who do you think their friends are? They're other high achievers. So they become your best recruiting resource.
Such a great point. I love that. One of the other things you talked about that I think would be valuable for folks listening in terms of their mindset is this idea of no means not yet.
That's right.
So talk a little bit about that, because it all ties in with rejection, or the fear of criticism that most of us carry around for various reasons and at various levels. But these folks have developed some kind of immunity to that. Tell us what's going on with them.
So I think we all get rejected a lot, right? But I think the high achievers, when they hear no, they know I haven't convinced you yet. I haven't gotten there yet. I didn't find the right strategy yet. So they add the word yet to the end of every sentence. And that means that when they hear no, unless it's personal safety, when they hear no, they're just using that as a data point. All right, you don't like this method, let me find another method. This didn't work, let me try something else. And they keep iterating until they actually get there.
Mm-hmm. You've done that, or you've seen that across the board in all kinds of organizations with some of the stories you've told from the scientists who are running this, research, and something gets blocked and they figure out another way to, approach the funding or approaching a number of different areas. But you also talked to, Steve Kerr in particular, the coach of the Golden State Warriors, who's just, to me, a remarkable human being. Talk about some of the things that he does that demonstrate his own high performance, and also what he does to foster that with his team members.
So Steve Kerr is a remarkable person. And I don't just mean because he's an 8-time NBA champion. He is truly a remarkable person who is grounded in his values more than anything I have ever seen in anyone. And for him, it's purely the love of the game. And he tries to remind his team of that love of the game, why they got in it for initially, and how do you actually maintain that? And he has his values, and every day he tries to live those out. So if he said basketball should be fun, he finds ways to make it fun. So there's music playing during the warm-ups, right? This pumped music that really gets everyone going. If it's somebody on a team's birthday, he finds creative ways. They create a whole photo montage, like it's the bar mitzvah. They find pictures from way back, and they actually have a whole video montage to celebrate each person's birthday. Because he said every person brings value to the team, from the number one player to the last one on the bench. Every single person has a purpose. And knowing their purpose and reminding them of their purpose and how they all work together as a team is critical. And I actually interviewed Zaza Pachulia, who is another two-time NBA champion who was on the Golden State Warriors, recently retired. And he said the team culture on the Warriors was unbelievable. And he said that's why they won those championships. There are great players everywhere, but they had the right team culture. And that started with Coach Steve Kerr, really talking about the values and instilling them in the team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just living that, not just professing it, but living it. Well, one other thing I want to go into with you is related to high performers and the way they manage their systems for being productive. And you're a great example of this. I have heard you talk about how you structure your day, and I would love for you to tie in your own personal system along with if there are any general guidelines from some of the other folks that you've interviewed.
Sure. So, it really irritates me when I hear this is what the high achievers do. These are their habits, copy their habits. You can't copy other people's habits. You have a very different life from them. So sure, many high achievers wake up at 4 or 5 in the morning, but if you're a night owl and go to sleep at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, how are you going to wake up at 5 a.m. and be functional? You're not. So it's not about copying their habits, but it's understanding their mindsets and emulating that. So what do I mean by that? I like to wake up early in the morning. I am one of those early risers. I am sharper in the morning, which means I'm more productive in the morning. That is when I'm able to do my deep focus work. So I will really focus on writing and editing and budget work, do those things in the morning because they take greater cognitive energy, right? Those are my peak performance hours. I'm not going to waste that time on passive tasks, Zooms and emails and returning text messages. That can wait till the afternoon when I'm a little bit more sluggish, because it doesn't require as much focus. So I don't want to burn my morning hours with that, because I can get more done in half an hour in the morning than I can in 2-3 hours in the afternoon. That's how high the focus is when I'm during those peak cognitive hours. So everyone has different deep cognitive hours. You need to know what works best for you and leverage that. But it's different for every person. That's why we cannot copy other people's habits, but we can emulate their mindsets.
Mm-hmm. That's such an important point, because too often we might try to copy someone and it doesn't work for us, and we can get into, oh, well, what's wrong with me? Instead of, how do I need to modify this so it can work for me?
That's right.
You have so many practical suggestions, as you mentioned. The last third of your book is really around specific things the reader can do in each of those 4 areas. As we wrap up, I would love for you to talk about maybe 1 or 2 of those that would be useful for my listeners, that they could actually take away and think about, how could I apply this?
So it was very important to me that I actually build in these actionable steps that people can start doing immediately. So we don't just talk about one day. One day I'm going to work toward being a high achiever. One day I'm going to be successful. I want to make today day 1. And the only way to make today day 1 is if I can give your readers, your listeners, your watchers, things that they can implement immediately. And I put a buffet of options there for each of the 4 elements, because I know that what works for one person is not going to work for another, because we're all different. And what works for a while, when we have a pandemic or a crisis or a change in our lives, we may need to change that. So, for example, when I talk about intrinsic motivation, I actually take the reader through what's called a passion audit to figure out what it is that you love doing, which is different from what you're good at. There's a difference. And we tease out what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you enjoy doing, what you don't enjoy doing, how you spend your weekends, right? There's actually a very structured way. And if your listeners want to be able to download that worksheet now, they actually can. They can just go to my website, ruthgotian.com/passion audit, and they can start figuring out for themselves how to start developing that and tapping into their intrinsic motivation. That's one of the tools. The other tool has to do with that 4th element, that informal learning. Remember, I talked about having a team of mentors. So there's actually different levels of who should be on your mentoring team. And I actually developed a worksheet for that as well. It comes with the book, but if you want to get a teaser now, you can just go, that's also on my website, ruthgotian.com/mentoring team. Hope everyone goes to check it out.
Oh, I hope they do too, Ruth. And even more importantly, buy your book so they can study it, because I think it's such a valuable resource. I think it can serve as a reference. If somebody's motivation or enthusiasm starts to lag, just reading 1 or 2 of the stories in there is enough to inspire you to think, well, yes, I can do this. And then you have those very specific actionable steps, as you said. So you've really mentioned your website. I would love for you to let people know, how can they learn more about you, the services you offer, your book, and just connecting with you?
Sure. So all the social media is just my name, Ruth Gotian, RuthGotian. You can get linked to where you can get the book anywhere in the world, because I know you have an international audience. So if you go to ruthgotian.com, which is my website, and then ruthgotian.com/book will show you everywhere in the world where you can get the book. And there's also a special bonus there if you want to check it out.
That's great. Ruth, thank you so much for being with me today. I just love the work you're doing. I can hardly wait to see what's next for you in terms of what you bring out, because to me, you embody these 4 elements. You are such a learner yourself, and you're always seeking, and you're a wonderful synthesizer of information, connecting the dots, putting them together, and then writing and speaking about them in a way that is really easy for people to understand. So just know that you are deeply appreciated. And thank you for being with me today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free facilitator guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.